more about Kah Seng's research on Loh Kah Seng, I strongly recommend his book, which is for sale behind. And US Press has brought a few copies of various books tonight. So if you're interested in what the speakers have presented, please drop by later and have a look at the titles there. Our next speaker is Jack Chia, who will talk about the myth of the inert Buddhist.
Thank you, Mei. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming despite the rain. And I'm honored to be sharing the stage with my two very distinguished colleagues who are experts on Singapore history. So for myself, I'm actually more of a historian of Chinese religion and Buddhism with a focus on Southeast Asia. So I will start my talk today by looking at religion, since that's what I work on. So I'll start by talking about this myth and misconception stereotype of Buddhists by looking at these two Fs. So these two Fs are not vulgarity or like Facebook, but what are these two Fs? First is forest. One very popular misconception or myth about Buddhism is that Buddhists are people who hide in the forest to meditate or are very withdrawn and very apathetic, very far away and disengaged from society. So there's always this image of Buddhists as being like very disengaged people, very apathetic, hiding in the forest just to meditate and eventually attain enlightenment. But another F that actually I like more is this popular stereotype, which is F for funeral. Because this is what you always see at the point that, that you will see Buddhist monks chanting and like yanjiu. And so some of my Buddhist studies friends and I always call this type of Buddhist monks at funeral Namo Kiang monks. No, why Namo Kiang? Because they don't really teach about Buddhism, but when they recite, they always Namo Namo and Kiang Kiang Kiang. So people always thought that, oh, these monks are Namo Kiang monks that will show up in funerals. So after Kah Seng's presentation on the apathetic Singaporean, so we have Singaporean apathy, and now we are looking at Buddhists that on Buddhism that what I'm talking about this evening, about Buddhists and apathetic. So now what about Singaporean Buddhists? Largely combo apathetic. Buddhists really like largely combo apathetic people. So today I hope to introduce you to a new concept on a lot of the very things that people, scholars of Buddhist studies talk about, and that is engaged Buddhism. So engaged Buddhism is actually a concept that was coined by a Vietnamese Buddhist monk, Thich Nhat Hanh, who was hospitalized recently, if you read about him in the news. So he was the first Buddhist monk and Buddhist scholar who came and introduced the term in the 1960s. And it was during the time of the Vietnam War, because he was actually exiled from Vietnam, and he went to France where he started his monastery, the Plant Village Monastery. And he was also a very important scholar of Zen Buddhism, and he suggests that how Buddhists should actually be socially engaged and not like Buddhists who hide in the forest. And it's especially so in the Zen context because he's a Zen master. So one of the focus of that Zen Buddhism is to attain enlightenment through meditation. So a lot of Zen Buddhists hide away and to meditate, but he actually suggests that Buddhists should be socially engaged. And this term was popular among the Buddhist community until about in the 1990s, where scholars of Buddhism started to talk more about this term, engaged Buddhism. One of the most important seminal works on engaged Buddhism is this edited volume, Engaged Buddhism, Buddhist Liberation Movements in Asia, and it was edited by Christopher Quinn and Sally King, and it's very easy to remember because it's Quinn and King the way you say. So it's always when you look for a co-author, it's very important to find someone that matches your name. I'm just kidding. But anyway, Quinn and King actually suggest that defines engaged Buddhism as this energetic engagement with social and political issues and crises. And they suggest that non-violent activist movements to address economic, social, political, and spiritual needs are very important characteristics of engaged Buddhism. So wherever, often in the more recent years, scholars who work on engaged Buddhism always look at the Buddhist movements in this, especially in this part of the world in Asia. So one of the very good examples is the saffron movement in Burma, where Buddhist monks went on the street to protest against the military junta. And a more recent one was in Taiwan, led by this Buddhist nun, Venerable Zhao Hui, and she was actually protesting against the establishment of the casino in Taiwan. That's why they were putting out these dice to actually put fun of the government for wanting to establish the casino. So how about engaged Buddhism in Singapore? So do we have engaged Buddhism in Singapore? And that's the very question that I want to ask in my research. So today I'm going to talk about engaged Buddhism in Singapore, and I actually want to focus on the case of Venerable Yan Pei and the Singapore Buddhist Welfare Services that he established in the 1980s to talk about engaged Buddhism. And I want to make two arguments. First is that Buddhists in Singapore are far from being apathetic or withdrawn. So they are not people who hide in the forest or cave or somewhere on top of Bukit Timah to meditate, but they are actually very much involved in social welfare and social development. And second, I hope to argue for the need to introduce socially engaged religious activities into the study of Singapore history. That is, I'm not only suggest that how we should look at the Buddhist engaged movement in Singapore, but I also suggest that we should also look at socially engaged, other forms of socially engaged activities, such as like activities by the Muslims, the Christians, the Hindus, and so on, to reconsider the belief of the apathetic Singaporean in Singapore history. So this is Yan Pei, and this is a newspaper report of him in 1991 when he became the abbot of the Gongmeng Monastery, the biggest Buddhist temple in Singapore. And they call him the scholar, social worker, and monk. So before I talk about Yan Pei and the Buddhist, the Singapore Buddhist Welfare Services, I will say a few words about the broader context that was going on in Singapore in the late 1970s and early 80s, and that is the rise of reformist Buddhism in Singapore. And one very important book that talks about this shift in Buddhism is actually a book by Hua Guning entitled State Society and Religious Engineering Towards Reformist Buddhism in Singapore. And in that book, Hua argues that there was a Buddhization of Chinese religious syncretism and a movement towards reformist Buddhism in Singapore. And she suggests that the agents responsible for transforming the religious landscape of the Singaporean Chinese include the Singapore state, the Buddhist Sangha, which is the community of monks and nuns, and the reformist Buddhists within the religious community. So Hua suggested 6 types of religious activities that reformist Buddhists engage in. First is to propagate the Buddhist scriptural knowledge to the public. Second, encourage general participation. Third, cultivate committed reformist Buddhists through Dharma classes and fellowships. And fourth, performing missionary work. Fifth, they believe in the need to put their faith in the actual real life practice and action. And sixth, legitimizing visa as a public holiday. And visa became a public holiday in Singapore in the late 1950s. And then in the secular domain, reformist Buddhists place a lot of emphasis on charity and welfare work because they believe that practicing Buddhism is not about just about meditation or chanting scriptures, but also doing charity and welfare work to benefit the community. Say a few words about Yan Pei, who is the monk that I'm focusing on. So Yan Pei, he was actually born in China in 1917 in the Jiangsu province, and he became a monk at a very young age in 1929. And his story was very interesting because his elder brother was a monk, so one day he went to the temple to visit his brother and thought, wow, staying at temple is cool because my parents won't laugh at me and it's quite fun. So that's why he decided to become a monk. So his parents were very upset, but and he became a monk since. So one thing about Yan Pei is that he was a very outstanding monk. So his abbot wanted to, the abbot of the temple wanted to make him the next abbot of the temple. But Yan Pei didn't like the idea because he was a very intelligent man. He wanted to become a Buddhist scholar. So in the middle of the night, he actually escaped and he went from Jiangsu down to Fujian to actually attend the Yunnan Buddhist College in Xiamen, which was one of the most important Buddhist institution at that time, and he became a student of one of the very important scholar, Meng-Tat Chia, who taught human life Buddhism or Renshen Foujiao. And it was at Meng-Tat Buddhist College where he also met another good friend who is In Shun, one of the most important Buddhist thinkers in the 20th century. And In Shun is also the master of the founder of Tzu Chi, who is Master Zheng Yan. So In Shun is a very important thinker, and he came up with this concept of humanistic Buddhism or 人生佛教, and talk about how Buddhists need to be socially engaged and be connected to the human world. So this is one of the major ideas of that In Shun actually taught and promoted. So thereafter, so Yan Pei and In Shun actually spent a lot of time together, and this is Yan Pei, and this is In Shun. So they were actually co-founded the college, but they left for Hong Kong during the Chinese Civil War. So, and after Hong Kong, Yan Pei went over to Taiwan together with In Shun, and he became the abbot of Sandao Monastery in Taipei. So if you are in Taiwan, you take the local subway, there will be a Sandao station, and then when you get out, it's this monastery. So this is one of the very modern monastery in the Taipei area. So he became the abbot, and this was In Shun with him. And so this was the ceremony when Yan Pei was officially appointed as the abbot of the monastery. But Yan Pei, he's actually more of a scholar monk rather than an abbot administrator, so he actually didn't really like that. So he finished his term and went, and after that left to actually teach in Southeast Asia. So he actually traveled around Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam for a couple of years. And then eventually he decided to settle in Singapore in 1963 upon the invitation of the Buddhist community in Singapore. So he became a close friend of Venerable Hong Chuan, Guang Chia, Chang Kai, and a few others. And he thought, well, Singapore is a nice place, so he decided to settle in Singapore in 1963 and became a permanent resident of Singapore. So, then, and when he was in Singapore, he was also invited to become the abbot of the Ling Fung Rajna Auditorium. So, Ling Fung Rajna Auditorium also has a very special place in the history of Buddhism in Singapore, because it was a Buddhist college that was actually founded by one of the very important Buddhist reformers, Tzu Hang, and he actually started the place as more of a Buddhist college called Ling Fung Shu Yuan. But after Yan Pei became the abbot, he decided to reform and revamp that place, actually build a quite, now you don't really find this very modern looking, but back then it's supposed to be quite modern looking Buddhist temple without all the dragon things and the big, because what he wanted to do was actually to teach Buddhism and promote a Buddhist education rather than open a temple for people to just come and pray. So eventually, he decided that Singapore is the place for him. He loved Singapore, and he became a Singapore citizen in 1981. So according to my respondents, he was actually quite a well-integrated new migrant. And although he cannot speak English, he cannot really speak English, but yeah, he's pretty well integrated. And that was also the time when he decided that he wanted to do something for social welfare in Singapore. So that was when he established the Singapore Buddhist Welfare Services in 1981. And his contributions to social welfare was very much recognized by the state. So he actually received the PBM and the EBM in 1986 and 1999 respectively. And at the same time, he also became the abbot of Guangmingsan Podasi in 1991 after Hong Chuan passed away in 1990. So he was actually appointed to be the successor, although he only stayed there for 3 years. This is the Singapore Buddhist Welfare Services. It's located in 105 Punggol Road, so if you're interested, you can go by to take a look. This is the Buddhist Welfare Service, and as you can see, the architecture of the temple is very modern, very different from the traditional Buddhist temple. And this is the building next to it. This is the Yan Pei building, named after him, and this building is very interesting because it runs both religious and social welfare secular activities in the same block. So this is the picture this is him when he received his award from then President Lee in 1992. So let's look at the Singapore Buddhist Welfare Services or the Singapore 佛教福利协会. So in the actually as early as in the 1970s, Yempe actually felt the need for Buddhists to be socially engaged and to give back to the communities. So he wasn't a monk who was only interested in going to funerals or hike somewhere to meditate, but he thought that Buddhists should be engaged and to give back to the society. So in 1980, he gave a Dharma talk and raised $8,350, and he used that amount of money to establish the Singapore Buddhist Welfare Services, and was officially registered on the 27th of May in 1981. So this is the website of Singapore Buddhist Welfare Services. And if you go to the website, you can see here the image of a late Venerable Yempe, who was the founder, and he said, everybody is born with potential powers of doing good to others. Let us bring them out so that other people can enjoy their brightness and warmth. And below that you see, click here for gyro donation form. Yeah, that's the catch. So Yempe's English Buddhism can be can be looked at in three ways. So first would be his focus on elder care and filial responsibility. That's something that he promoted and he strongly believed in. And second is his interest in organ donation and kidney dialysis. It's something very new to the Buddhist community because in the 1980s, not many people talk about kidney dialysis. Not many people think about things like organ donation, but he was someone who was actually actively promoting it, especially within the Buddhist community. And third is on drug prevention and rehabilitation, and drug rehab. So this is also something that not all the Buddhists were actually thinking about at the time. So first, on elder care and filial responsibility. So it's also something very interesting when I talk about responsibility, because some of them thought that, at that time, because Yempe was quite old, so he was quite elderly, so maybe that's why he's so concerned about it. So anyway, he was extremely concerned with the welfare of the elderly. So in the magazine, the periodicals, and the essay he wrote, he placed a lot of emphasis on talking about the connection between elder care, filial responsibility, and Buddhism. So one of the very important sermons that he gave, and there was actually a series of sermon that was subsequently published, was on 佛教是最重视孝道的宗教, which is that Buddhism is a religion that places a lot of emphasis on filial piety. So, because he was so extremely concerned about the welfare of the elderly, he played a very active role in food distribution and public assistance. So in the newsletter of the Singapore Buddhist Welfare Services, there's a chart where he shows how much money is put in every month for food distribution, how many people they reach out to, and so on. So in January 1985, Yempe actually even took a step further by establishing Grace Lodge, which is actually an old folks home in the Singapore Buddhist Welfare Services. And the Grace Lodge provides shelter and care for needy female elderly regardless of race or religion. So when I was there were actually residents who are residents that are Christians or residents who are Hindus and live there, and also residents who are Taoists, and they are more than welcome to stay there. And so this is one of the newspaper report about the opening of the Grace Lodge, talking about the importance to care for the elderly. And also from the periodicals that were published by the Singapore Buddhist Welfare Services, I saw a lot of very interesting articles about elderly and even issues regarding poverty in Singapore. And one of the very interesting articles actually talks about the poverty line, really, because in Singapore we don't actually have a poverty line, but this was something that he was actually talking about, this poverty line and how old people were just staying below the poverty line, and it was something that he was extremely concerned with. So he actually argued for the need to take care of the elderly and of course filial responsibility. So this is the Grace Lodge, which is located next to the Yempe building. The second, Yempe also supported organ donation. So he organized this seminar in September 1983, known as Kidney Donation, Buddhist View and Medical View. So he invited a panel of medical experts who gave their their perspective about organ donation from in the medical perspective, and Pei and a few other Buddhist monks gave their perspective from a Buddhist perspective, talking about ideas of charity and giving, especially in the more Mahayana spirit, because Pei is a Mahayana monk. And so one of the things that he emphasizes on this Buddhist concept of 无畏施 or selfless giving, because they believe that organ donation or organ giving is like the greatest gift that one can ever do to someone. So actually this is something that he promoted. So he also organized a kidney care exhibition in December 1983. We talk about how you actually need to have a healthy diet, drink lots of water and so on, so that you can take good care of your kidney. And he also contributed to the founding of the NKF Dialysis Center at Hougang at Hougang Avenue 1 in 1992. So this is the NKF Center there. Yeah, that was actually the time before the NKF scandal. So anyway, so that was the Pei Center. And also in the more recent years, after he passed on, by his disciple and the Buddhist Social Welfare Services decided to establish a grant called the Venerable Yan Pei National Kidney Foundation Research Fund. So if anyone do research on kidney, you can apply for the grant. It's quite a lot of money, I think. You can get up to 300,000 over a maximum duration of 3 years. So then you can do a lot of research project. And maybe not so much in the sciences, I think, but that's a lot of money for people in the humanities, like 300,000. But anyway, yeah. And finally, we also emphasize on the danger of drug abuse. And again, this is something that is also quite different from what other Buddhist monks were talking about, because drug abuse isn't something that really Buddhists would focus on, even though one of the 5 precepts is not to take intoxicants. But Buddhists don't really talk about drug abuse and issues like that. And they actually thought that Buddhists should actually play a more proactive role in helping Buddhists who are actually helping Buddhists who were recovering from drug abuse. So actually he decided to establish a Green Heaven in 1993, and that became the first and the only Buddhist halfway house in Singapore. And the halfway house provides a 6 to 12 months residential rehab and treatment program for the residents. So this is the Green Heaven halfway house, which is located in Jurong, North 105 Punggol. And this is actually, they have a lot of activities for the residents. So Yan Pei passed away on November 10, 1996. So after he passed away, his disciple, Venerable Kuan Yin, took over as the director of the Singapore Buddhist Welfare Services. So these are some of the current services that the Buddhist welfare services are engaging in, including medical care, nursing care, public education and child care, arts, culture and library. They have a family service center now, a halfway house, youth and volunteer program, and social welfare and community services. So in fact, they started a hospital in 2001, known as the Bright Vision Hospital. But unfortunately, it was in 2011, they realized that it was too expensive and they lacked the expertise to actually run the hospital. So they decided to hand it over to Sing Health to help with the operation of the hospital. So another very interesting outreach activity that the Singapore Buddhist Welfare Services do is the mobile healthcare service. And now they drive this very big green bus known as the iCenter. And this bus actually provides free healthcare services to residents in the northeast region. So if you want to know where the bus is going to, and if you want to get free medical service, you can just log on to the website and find out where the bus is going. So you can just go there and get medical get healthcare for free. Yeah. And yeah. So I will very quickly sum up my presentation. My talk today actually focuses on the contributions of Yan Pei as a case to actually look at socially engaged Buddhism in Singapore. And as I mentioned earlier, my presentation has two goals. First is actually to think about how Buddhists and Singaporeans are not apathetic people, but actually they have a very important role in society, and they can be very socially engaged, and they are definitely not people that hide in cave or show up in funerals. So this is something that I hope to suggest. And this is also something that is also my ongoing project, which is part of my dissertation work, is to actually focus on socially engaged Buddhism in maritime Southeast Asia, which is Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore, and consider Buddhist modernity in this part of the world. And second, I want to suggest how we should actually think about moving towards a history of religion and civic engagement in Singapore, because I think this is also something that is still very much lacking. We haven't talked about the socially engaged religion in the Singapore context, and because we always think about Singapore as a secular state and always this divide between the state and society. So this is something that I want to suggest and hope that I'd like to hear your comments and suggestions maybe during the Q&A. So this is the end of my presentation, and thank you very much.